Good evening to you all. I am Arthur Duff, Head of Library Services at the Lilavati Lalbai Library. Today we are launching the first of a series of 4 lectures on the thinking and architecture of Louis Kahn, being delivered by Professor Jaimini Mehta. On behalf of our librarian, Tejaswini Joshi, and her team, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Mehta and to you, our supporters. Professor Mehta is an old friend of CEPT University and will be known to so many of you as a teacher and thinker, challenging the norms and pushing the boundaries of how we understand architecture. As a student of Kahn in his studio at the University of Pennsylvania in 1965, and also from his time spent working with him in his office, Mehta is uniquely placed to reflect on the work of this great master. He has already published extensively on the work of Kahn, and this series is a chance for him to reflect again on the significance of his work. We are privileged to be able to present this 4-part series of lectures that begins today, and would like to thank Professor Mehta on all our behalf for so generously sharing this experience. As I keep reminding you, the library is the knowledge hub, the very center and beating heart of our wonderful campus. The current challenge of being virtual is the opportunity for us to become even closer to you. We are putting the finishing touches to our new digital platform, the CEPT repository, that will enable online access to our collections. It will also push its boundaries as a place of possibilities, such that the unexpected can also be found. In this way, we are extending the role of the library and its beating heart across the country and the world. The physical library is well known to all of you, and we hope that our online repository will also become embedded in your daily routine. As always, it is a pleasure to be able to acknowledge the people involved in making such events happen. From our side, may I thank Harsh Bhavsar and Nidhi Bhadrakia, who have given us the technical support to enable this series to take place. Coordinating for the library, as usual, is Payal Dan. Thanks to all of you for coming and for your continuing support of CEPT's commitment to building a better world through the agency of our 5 faculties. The lecture series continues over the following weeks. Please note the dates from the poster. At the end of each lecture will be the opportunity to share your comments in real time. We look forward to hearing from you over a cup of virtual chai and dry biscuits. As a way of contextualizing Professor Mehta's commentary on Kahn, we are screening a series of small films on the development of the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, originally designed by Kahn and built in 1972, and significantly added to by Renzo Piano 6 years ago. These films have been directed and produced by Ulton Guilfoyle and are being screened tomorrow, Friday at 6:30 p.m. And now, may I invite Professor Mehta to start his lecture series. Thank you.
Hello, this is the first of the 4-part series on the architecture of Louis Kahn. Kahn's architecture is not an easy architecture to understand. His buildings do not resemble what we are familiar with as modern architecture. His language of architecture has no reference to the immediate past. He seems to derive his associations, his references, his inspiration with something very different than what the heroes of our modern movement in architecture brought out. And when you look at his sketches that he made when he was traveling as a young man, one is likely to think that he was looking for his inspiration, his references, his sources in a distant past rather than the immediate past. He seemed to be looking for a beginning. But I want to argue that Kahn has established his position as one of the most important architect of the 20th century, not only by the buildings he built, not by his production, but also by the concepts, by the ideas that he articulated, not as frequently as one would like, and not in any clear way as one would appreciate, but still they're there. And I want to make an attempt to bring them together to see what informed his architectural imagination. In 1973, while speaking in Tel Aviv, Israel, he said something that gives us a clue to unraveling, understanding a lot of things about his architecture. This is what he said. Then I thought, what would be a harking back, starting from the beginning? I'm particularly interested in English history, which fascinates me. Though it's a bloody history, it still has this quality of search. However, every time I start to read volume 1, I linger on chapter 1 and I reread it and always feel something else in it. Of course, my idea is probably to read volume 0, just to peer into this terrific thing, man, who has this great capacity for putting things into being that nature cannot put into being. Apart from the phrase volume 0, there are two things which are important here. This is talking about a beginning, and it is this search for the beginning, for that impossible book that is talking about, volume 0, that I believe forms the thread which begins to connect everything he does. He announced his arrival on the architectural scene with something very simple, this very simple building. It's a small building. It's the facilities for a community swimming pool. Looking at it, one feels it is so simple. It's the 4 squares and a courtyard. Simple as that. Anybody can do that. But it was not this, it's not the program or the size of the building, but it was the way it was conceived, the way it was imagined, that made everybody take notice of it. We'll talk about this much more in detail a little later. This building was followed by another larger building, the Richards Medical Tower in Philadelphia. He carried that same conceptual new direction while thinking about this building. It's a laboratory building, but it also has presented a new way of thinking about architecture. So when we talk about new way of thinking about architecture, let's see what was the prevalent language of architecture, prevalent attitude to architecture. We know that modern movement in architecture has reached its zenith, its peak, around the middle of the 20th century. We knew its heroes, we know its language, we know its vocabulary, pure, simple geometric forms, standing isolated, clearly articulated, distinguished from anything in its surrounding. This is Oscar Mayer's buildings in Brasilia, or Alvar Aalto's auditorium in Helsinki, or on the left, Mies van der Rohe building, it's a Gram building in New York. On the right, the Lever Brothers by SOM, or Gropius's Bauhaus, Le Corbusier in France. Corbu was also an architect and a polemicist. He thought about it, he analyzed his architecture and talked about it, wrote about it, and demonstrated that in the right, upper right, he had demonstrated how the Marseille building came about. In this, he has taken the components of housing, deconstructed them, and reconfigure them in a new form, in a rational way. At the bottom, Villasova, a house. There also, he came up with these 5 principles that characterizes modern architecture. And this building became the icon for those ideas. Corbusier also came up with, he proposed that all architecture, past as well as present, can be reduced to its fundamental geometric forms: squares, triangle, circle, sphere, pyramid, cylinder, etc. He actually looked back at history and reread into history this principle of abstraction. However, about the same time as modern movement was at its peak, questions began to be raised about its adequacy. There was a group of young architects in Europe, which came to be known as Team 10. They began to search for that which will make architecture more robust. They were questioning and realizing that the architectural thought they had inherited from the modern movement had some inadequacies that needed to be addressed. The group consisted of Jacob Bakema and Aldo van Eyck in Netherlands, George Scandalis, Shadrach Woods in Paris, France, Alison and Peter Spitzen in London, and Giancarlo De Carlo in Italy. So it was a kind of a diverse group spread throughout Europe, but they had also come together to the same realization that something needs to be done to overcome this inadequacy of the very process of architectural thought. They began to experiment through their own building production, their own designs, new ways of conceiving architecture. Here is the design of the Free University of Berlin, in which Shadrach Woods and George Scandalis and Joseph demonstrated what modern architecture had rejected, that is the notion of change and growth. Modern movement has thought of architecture as complete within itself, not changing, not growing, not evolving. Once it is done, it's done, finite. But the world was changing at a faster pace, and architecture was not responding to that. So in this case, the architects thought of the university as a campus in which each departments, each fields of knowledge, like for example physics, mathematics, architecture, music, whatever, would change in demands of in response to the demands. But the basic structure of the university will remain the same. So that which is constant has been given one architectural expression, and that which is variable, another which can undergo changes. Aldo van Eyck in Netherlands came up with this idea of twin phenomenon, or something in between, something which is ambiguous. Ambiguity was anathema to modern movement. It sort of was looking for clarity, and therefore only one way or singular way of reading it. Aldo van Eyck, and he built this wonderful orphanage building in Amsterdam, demonstrated that architecture could carry ambiguity in such a way that every one of us could read multiple meanings through it. However, we need to make an important point here. This group of young architects, very good, and they did fantastic, beautiful buildings, were not questioning the foundational basis of modern movement. They were trying to overcome the inadequacies, the infirmities, the gaps in the ideological basis, in the thought system which informed the architecture until that time. There is a very important element here, element of history. a sense of history that was inbuilt, that was incorporated within the very ideology of modern movement in architecture. And that was, as we understand history, as a kind of a linear progression from past to present to future. It imagines a line going in the same direction, starting from some primordial old ancient past to the present, leading towards supposedly a utopian future, in which each act of mankind has a reference in what has happened in the past, immediate past, and even beyond that, and is an improvement over that, and which will also lead to further improvement as we go along until we reach that utopia. This is a kind of historicism that was not universal. Other societies have developed different ways of looking at history. But this was inbuilt into the very idea of modernity or modernism as was going on at that time. And so this group was actually extending that. They looked at the modern movement and said, yeah, this is not adequate. So let's take it further. That fundamental questioning of modern movement was undertaken across the Atlantic in America. There was another group, came to be known as the Philadelphia School. Unlike the Europeans who had spread all over in several countries, this group was concentrated in one city, Philadelphia, and they were all teaching in the University of Pennsylvania. It was not a formal grouping. Unlike Team 10, there were just a bunch of architects who got together, but together in close proximity with each other. They shared ideas, they encouraged each other, supported each other to develop as they were going on. Informally led by Louis Kahn, it had Romualdo Giurgola, an Italian who had emigrated to the United States, Robert Geddes, an American, Robert Venturi, who many of us know a great deal about, and then there was this brilliant French engineer, Robert Laricolai. He was not just an engineer, he was a philosopher and a poet too. And then Edmund Bacon, the urban designer, Ian McCarr, the landscape architect. There was this very vibrant and energetic environment in those days. On a more personal note, I want to add that this young man standing behind Louis Kahn is none other than a very young me, Jaimini Mehta. I had the opportunity and the privilege to be there at that time and interacting with every one of those and learning a great deal from each of these. Robert Geddes wrote about this later, and this is what he said. There was sense that a new architecture and a new urban design was evolving. It was unself-conscious and was not looking elsewhere except to Corbu and Mies. We didn't go elsewhere to see what was happening. People came to Philadelphia, including Smithson, Van Eyck, and Bakema. The evening Lou presented the Trenton Community Center, the bathhouse that I showed you earlier. There was a feeling of being at the absolute frontier of architecture. Being at the absolute frontier of architecture. Why would he say that? They are very strong words and a very strong feeling, passionate. So let's look at what this building that he's talking about, the bathhouse. This is a very simple program. It's a place that people come to swim, and you require certain facilities where they can place whatever they are carrying, their bags and baggages, change their clothes, take a shower, you need a toilet, go to swim, come back, have a shower, change again, pick up your bags and then go home. This has been going on for years and years now. And every swimming pool, public swimming pool we have these facilities. But if you look at immediate past, what has been done so far until now, you realize that we generally end up putting all these facilities somewhere else, out of sight. You don't want to see them. These are the functional things, these are the servants. They are not part of the family. And therefore you don't see them, you put them behind the house. That is what will come across if you do what we generally call as the case studies, or in other areas of knowledge, the literature review, which looks at the immediate past and the knowledge gathered through all the human endeavors that it has come through, and see what has happened and how best you can take it further or improve upon it. Instead, Kahn did not do any immediate referencing. He looked at the very beginning of this institution as if there are no precedents, no examples to follow, no references. You have nothing to follow. Then you begin to realize that it's a meeting place. It's a place of people's gathering. It is where you come together, greet each other, people you have not seen for a while, exchange notes, exchange information, even gossips. And that needs to be celebrated. It is this that led Kahn to imagine this institution in a new way, whereby these corners, for example, all of these that make up the square pyramidal spaces are what we would call the servant spaces. This is where he made this distinction between the servant spaces and the served spaces, which was not just an architectural distinction, but was also an institutional distinction, a new imagination, new institutional imagination, a new architectural imagination. So as you enter here, there's a place counter where you dump your bags. There's some storages at the corner, and then you have a courtyard from where there are baffled indirect entries into the women's changing room with their own toilets and a shower area. On this side, the same thing happens, the men's changing room with their own showers. And then you have a porch from where you can climb up to the swimming pool. You have here the machines for the swimming pool and a manager's office. Simple as that. But here, the servants then occupy the corners and they support this institution. So instead of, unlike leaving them behind, unseen, out of sight, they now are brought in as the primary structure, not only of the architecture, but also of the institution of this. So this is a new way of conceiving architecture. No new way of saying, all right, whatever has happened so far has happened, but I'm going to go back. So here is the volume 0. He locates himself at the volume 0 of this institution, the swimming pool bathhouses. And it is this that actually made one feel that here is a new way of conceiving architecture. This is how it looks. Here is the central courtyard. This is the counter. You enter here, the counter, and then there is a men's changing room on the left. On the right is women's changing room with their own showers. And then there is a porch and the swimming pool behind. Thus, Khan has shifted the paradigm from an architecture of ideas to an architecture of imagination. The whole modern movement in architecture was founded on the idea of rationality, as we shall see a little later in the series. On the other hand, imagination can take you way further than what ideas could. We have a wonderful saying in India, and it goes something like this in Hindi. It says, "Jahan pahunche Ravi, wahan pahunche Kavi." Ravi is sun, and it always stood for reason, clarity. It can take us further. It opens up so many things. But Kavi is the custodian of imagination. And it says that imagination will take you far further than where reason cannot even go. Jahan pahunche Ravi, wahan pahunche Kavi. Volume 0 then is an imaginative projection backward. It's not a rejection of history. On the contrary, it seeks the beginning of everything. The essence lies in the beginning. So one is looking at the essence of beginning. And therefore, whether it is that simple bathhouse in Trenton or a humble house in the suburbs of Philadelphia, a large Capitol complex in Dhaka, or the museum, Kimball Art Museum in Texas, or the same, a gallery at Yale University. All of these have been born out of the search for the essence of the institution they represent. And once they're realized, they're presented to us, seeking our agreement, our approval, as it were, because they are reasonable and because they appeal to our sense of ethics, that this is the right thing to do. We all have this inarticulate but still ingrained in us the sense of ethics that says that we have to do something which is the right thing to do here and now. So these are the right thing to do here and now. That is the meaning of Volume 0. Thank you.